So tonight's presentation is going to be on the Julington Durbin Preserve. And this is located in southwest Duval County near Mandarin and just above the St. Johns County line. This is a more detailed picture of it. As you can see, here's I-95 here, and then Old St. Augustine Road so on the north. And then you've got Racetrack Road here in St. Johns County, sort of bordering it on the south. But the real borders are two creeks, Julington Creek and Durbin Creek. So they join and merge into one, and then that ends up being Julington Creek, which you can see when you're crossing on State Road 13, and the marina, the big marina that's out there when Julington dumps into the St. Johns River. But upstream, they're actually two inland creeks, Julington and Durbin. So hence the name for the preserve. It's a Julington Durbin Preserve. It's bounded on two sides by these creeks. And here is a close-up of the trails, the trail map. There's a white trail that's 3.9 miles if you do it round trip. And there's a yellow trail that it connects to. So if you want to keep going, you can go for another 2.2 miles. And then there's a little side trail, this red trail, that goes out to the creek. So you can actually go down and walk down to the Durbin Creek. And we'll be showing you all that too. So if you want to get a good hike, and if you're in the surrounding area, it's pretty much bounded on all sides by civilization. When you're inside, you wouldn't believe it, but there's big developments on either side. There's lots of big apartment buildings along Bartram Park. There's a big shopping center up there on Old St. Augustine Road, but this is completely protected, and it's just like you're in the middle of the woods somewhere. And so it's a really neat place to come and hike, or a lot of runners go out there and do some training for long distance running or cross country. So you can get a good hike in here. I was doing some prep hikes for some long distance backpacking trips that I led a couple of years ago before COVID. And we come out here and just get everybody kind of conditioned by just doing a couple rounds of this thing and putting in 10 miles or so. So anyway, so it's a nice hiking trail. Do we still have background noise? Someone commented in the chat. All right, I can mute everybody. Let me go ahead and do that. Mute all. All right, so you're all muted. If you want to say something, unmute yourself. You're perfectly welcome to do so anytime along the way, but probably works better with all these people if we wait till the end, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion. By the way, I'm using a free version of Zoom, so this is going to be a 40-minute presentation, and after that, just cuts out. So I'm going to try and time it so you don't get all cut off, and we'll have a good, graceful goodbye. All right, so moving right along. You can also kayak along Durbin Creek and along Julington Creek. There's a put-in in a little park across Old St. Augustine Road where there's a canoe and kayak launch for Julington Creek, but I'm going to show you the kayak launch for Durbin Creek. In this presentation, I'm going to show you a few shots from Durbin Creek. So to get to the kayak launch for Durbin Creek, it's a new one. There used to be one kind of right along here when Racetrack Road crosses Durbin, and you could get off, and there was kind of a rough little road, like a side road, like a dirt road. You could drive in here and get on down here. But when they widened Racetrack Road to accommodate all the development up there, they took out, that boat launch, or, it wasn't really a dock or anything. It wasn't really a boat launch. It was just somewhere where we always put in, but it was blocked off, and that little road was wiped out. So they promised it would replace that, and by golly, they did. And they built a beautiful, big, long boardwalk into a nice new canoe launch right off a dock, a kayak launch right off a dock, and I'll show you that. And it's right near this new Publix that's near this new development, this new mall down there called the Pavilion at Durbin Park. So it's right off a racetrack road, and it's right in the left side of the most west side of the Publix parking lot. So you just go in and go to Publix, but then you just kind of veer left, follow the parking lot, and you'll see, you know, the boardwalk down there, and you'll see where you can put in. And so that's really nice. And then this is a little picture of your kayak route. So this is Durbin Creek, and you just go along here, and then, as I say, it merges into Julington. And along the way, at this point right here, you actually pass by in a canoe or kayak the red trail that I showed you before. So where you come down and walk down to the Durbin Creek, you'll be passing that on your kayak trip. So it's kind of cool. So you can get a view of this ecosystem from the water or by hiking through the land. So Julington Durbin was acquired in 2001 for $16 million, and it was part of a very important preservation project launched by former Mayor John Delaney, who was able to spearhead an effort to get some funding to acquire property in Jacksonville to set aside for conservation. And last month and this month at the Sierra Club here, we're focusing on conservation of land. We had a program last Monday about the North Florida Land Trust. I'll be talking about them in a minute. And they are a nonprofit that is in the business of finding and securing, purchasing and managing lands that they want to commit to conservation, to preservation in perpetuity. And this Jacksonville Preservation Project was similar to that. And it was a very important project because not only did it lead to acquiring Julington Durbin, but it led to acquiring Cedar Point, Betts Tiger, a lot of the land that's up there north of Heckscher Drive, that's now known as the Seven Creeks Recreation Area. So there was a lot of land acquired early in the 2000s as a result of this initiative that Mayor Delaney spearheaded. And Julington Durbin is one of those preserves, one of those conservation tracts. So it's about 2,000 acres on that peninsula that I showed you on the map between the confluence of the Durbin and Julington Creeks. And there's 9 unique ecosystems. We're going to look at 3 or 4 of them tonight. It's a very historic site. There's 22 documented historic sites. So they're not publicized because they want to protect them. So I don't know where they are, but they're documented internally to somebody. I know a few of them. I'm going to point out one of them tonight. And it protects the watershed of Durbin and Julington Creeks. Because as I mentioned, there's so much development all around. The north side has been developed for quite a while on Old St. Augustine Road, but Racetrack Road used to be kind of like a country road almost with nothing there. And now, as is most of St. Johns County, in Northwest anyway, it's all suburban development, you know. So you'll see later on in the pictures how when you walk down that red trail and you come to Durbin Creek, you look across and there's a structure there, there's a little boat dock that belongs to a development, Celestina. So you can't see it, but just behind the trees that are on the other bank of the Durbin Creek, there's a huge housing development. So there's a lot of building going on. And if this preservation, this preserve was not there, this would certainly be developed, because this particular type of ecosystem, a sand hill, is prime development area because it's pretty flat, it's dry, it's all the good things, but it's all the good things for nature too. And it's a pretty unique ecosystem I'm going to talk about a little bit. So this preserves the habitat for the local species of plants and animals, many of whom are threatened or endangered. So we'll talk about that too as we go. So why conserve land? Well, one of the main problems we have is we're in the midst of an extinction event, the sixth mass extinction event since the planet started. And it's called the Holocene extinction, which means it's human caused. It's because of our species that this is happening. And is 100 to 1,000 times higher rate of extinction than the natural background rates would otherwise be. So the main threat to 85% of all these endangered plant and animal species that are part of this extinction event is habitat loss. That's the main threat that they face. And so preserving their habitat is the most important thing we can do. There's obviously other things we can do to prevent these extinction of these species, but habitat is the most important thing. We have an emerging threat to us as well, and some other species, which is climate change. And if we preserve natural spaces, green spaces, that cover that, vegetation is cooling, has a cooling effect. It also absorbs and sequesters carbon. So there's a number of benefits to conserving natural spaces to the problem of climate change. But in addition, there are economic benefits that can be quantified. These areas, particularly the ones we select for conservation, one of the chief areas that we focus on, or some organizations like North Florida Land Trust focus on, are areas that are important for aquifer replenishment. All of you who drink water out of your taps are drinking water coming out of our Floridan aquifer, which is an underground supply of water that's continually being replenished by absorption into the rain, and then into the sky, and then it rains, and then it filters through our land and the limestone beneath it, and then becomes our aquifer, which then we end up using. We tap and we drink it. So it's an important service that this provides to us, is actually purifying our water. Wetlands and other natural spaces help to prevent floods and stormwater from inundating our space. So it's an important service that way too. Water quality, I've mentioned, the filtration capability of some of our wetlands and some of our other types of land. Carbon sequestration and cooling, I've mentioned as well. Then there's recreation. Florida is known for tourism, of course. Ecotourism is also a huge industry here. Our beaches, sport fishing, it's like a $15 million industry. Our wild food and fisheries is a $15 billion industry. So all of these recreational opportunities, as well as our food sources, add up to billions of dollars that are direct benefits of our environment. So if we don't conserve our environment, of course, we're reducing those services that it provides. So there are some campaigns out there that are pretty famous or pretty well known and having some impact. One is 30 by 30. It's a Sierra Club slogan. I think the Biden administration has also adopted it. And the idea here is to conserve 30% of the United States landmass by 2030. So Florida does a pretty good job of conserving land, actually. We're a little below 30, but we're pretty close to that. And that's mainly because of a program that was started in the 90s called Florida Forever, and it was enshrined in our Constitution. When was it? 2013, 2014. And that's a dedicated program where there's funding every year to acquire land for conservation. So I think in the last legislative session, it was 150 million. It might have been increased to 300 million. So Florida does a pretty good job. Then there are private organizations. One is the North Florida Land Trust. They're kind of our local land trust. And they are, as I said, a company or an organization that seeks out, identifies, quantifies the value from an environmental perspective of these lands, and then puts together campaigns and fundraising projects in order to acquire those lands. And we here at Sierra Club in Northeast Florida, as part of our conservation priorities, have identified land acquisition and preservation as one of the things that we focus on and try to work on here locally. And as a matter of fact, in 2018, this particular preserve was threatened because remember how I said it was acquired in 2001. And then the developers that the city bought it from then decided, wow, everyone's moving to St. Johns County. Wow, I wish we had that property back so we could develop more homes and make more money. So they wanted to kind of do a swap. They had other property up on Black Hammock Island, is up in that Cedar Point area where I was mentioning before. So they were going to exchange that property to be preserved for this property. And so Sierra Club and other local conservation groups protested and, got a lot of publicity about that. So we were able to, mount public opinion against this and against the concept that you could even do this kind of exchange. Once it's acquired and once the deal is done, it was supposed to be kept forever. So the precedent isn't good that you could do it. And then like 2 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later, you could change your mind to decide, well, let's, do a deal with the developer. So anyhow, we won that fight. We still have the Julington Durbin Preserve there. And it's, even better than it was before. So I'll talk about 3 of the habitats in Julington Durbin Preserve tonight. One is a sandhill. The second is a floodplain forest. And the third is just the river itself and that community, that habitat of the river. So we're going to be hiking through the sandhill and floodplain forest, and then we'll be kayaking a little bit on the river. So I hope you enjoy some of the pictures. So what is a sandhill? Sandhills exist at higher elevations as implied by the name. It's got very sandy soil. I'll show you some pictures of that if you haven't noticed those things before in your walkabouts in Florida. It's a very open savanna of basically one dominant species of tree is a pine. Yeah, they're either slash or longleaf pine typically in these environments. This is a fire-dependent ecosystem. It is really maintained by fire. If there's not periodic fire, this whole system, goes to pot. So I'll talk about that a little bit as we go through the pictures. And so it's got a very focused single species canopy when it's in equilibrium and it's at climax. But because of that canopy, there's a very diverse but controlled understory. So you've got saw palmetto bushes, like these low bushes. Gallberry bushes are a low bush. The wiregrass is the grass. It's the floor of this forest. And so because of this, you have this vista. It's almost a savanna. You can look through these trees because they're spaced. And you'll see in the pictures, and I'm sure you've seen it walking around Florida, North Florida. It's just this beautiful open vista with these trees dotting the view. and then underneath this very low, vegetation. But that supports a wide variety of animal life. So we'll see some of that. So this is what I'm talking about. See these widely spaced trees, these pine trees, and then you see the very low brush where it's not a really thick forest. It's a very wide open forest. So it's just a beautiful place to walk around in. Here's your sandy soil. And the wiregrass is these grasses that grow in that sandy soil. And all these lower understory plants are all fire resistant. So you can see a fire rage through these forests. You can see actually this fire has been here. This tree has been burned out, this log. Within a month or two, the wiregrass grows back. So they've got roots below the sandy soil and they can just come popping right back. And same with any of these bushes that grow in this ecosystem. They're able to sustain themselves and regrow easily with fire, and other species can't. And so that's what makes this ecosystem so unique. So here's a good example of a burned out stump. So you can see there's been fire in this particular area, this preserve. And part of that is because we light fires now. The Forest Service does controlled burns. And that's because we tend not to like the natural process, which has been going on for millennia, to occur near our houses because, once the fire starts, it's a little harder to control it. So they control it so they can go through and burn out some of the excess vegetation. So the lightning storms, which usually are what naturally cause these fires, don't have much flammable material to start their fires. So we do it for it, and we control this environment and maintain this ecosystem on a manual basis. And Florida actually has got a great program of controlled burn. They're really almost the nation's leaders at this whole process. And there are other areas throughout the country that have problems with forest fires. Part of that is they don't do the controlled burns in the same intensity that we do to control these beautiful sandhill and other pine uplands. So here's that other shrub species that's pretty common through these forests is the gallberry. It grows 3 to 4 feet high. Is these elliptical leaves. They're upturning when they're ripe. This isn't a ripe. This isn't taken during the season when they ripen. But they have these black berries, and the early settlers used them for ink. It's also food for songbirds. The other one, you probably all know this, is the saw palmetto, this bush here with these little spiky leaves, looks like a palm frond. In the winter, they grow these green fruit clusters, or drupes, as they're called. They're used in men's health, and bear and other animals feed on the berries. And then saw palmetto grows. You measure it not by tree rings. Big trees, you measure the tree rings, and you can tell how old this tree is. With saw palmetto, you measure the length of the trunk, and it grows 0.1 inches per year. So if you look at these are over 6 feet long, some of these trunks. That means these particular plants are over 600 years old. And that's right in. All of this is from Julington Durbin. These are all pictures I've taken myself, walking through, hiking through. Most of them are taken at our walk last month. So even though a lot of this area, of course, was developed, there's been, farms and, plantations here, but there's certain areas where the vegetation has been there and hasn't been removed for hundreds of years. And saw palmetto looks like a palm tree, but it isn't. Or, your juvenile sable palmettos, which is our state palm tree, look similar to this when it's first growing. But the difference is the salt palmetto has kind of like a blunt edge where it meets the leaves. And a sable palm, I'll show you a little bit later. It's more like a spiky look. Here's some wildflowers that were out that day, because those wildflowers will grow when this is in balance and there's fires clearing out some of the, the other species that might crowd these wildflowers out. So this is a seed box. And we have this beautiful butterfly pea. All this was out there that day when we were walking through. It's really pretty. This is just like a couple of feet high. This pale meadowberry. And a little white flower, teeny white flower with 5 white petals called Tread Softly, because you don't want to get close to it and try picking it because it causes a rash. And here's the chief of the whole place is the longleaf pine. That's our dominant tree species in these sandhills. And it's fire dependent, very long needles, 9 to 18 inches, huge pine cones. So if you see a big pine cone under this pine, you'll know that's a longleaf pine. It's not a slash pine. And these forests, longleaf pine forests, used to cover a huge area, 90 million acres from Virginia to Florida to Texas, and now only 4% of that forest remains. And why is that? It's because these were key to our 19th century shipbuilding effort when we were building our merchant fleet and our navies, and it was all wood. So the trees make good masts, the planks make good sides of the ship, the sap makes a good tar that's used to seal the ships. And then also the sap was used to boil down to make kerosene, which was fuel for lighting lamps that were used on the ships. So longleaf pine starts its life as a pine cone, but then as it plants the seeds, it develops this grassy stage. So that, as you can see, this is right next to the soil here. And all it is just a bunch of pine needles. It looks like grass. And in this stage, it's fire resistant. And it stays this way for several years while it's developing and putting down its root system. And then all of a sudden, it just pops up and gets into the growth stage. And it has to grow really quick because at this stage, it's vulnerable and it can be burned. And it's trying to get to about 10 feet or 15 feet above the floor of the forest, because at that point, it'll be safe and it'll be above the level of the fire. Here's another species which you'll see trying to kind of encroach upon these sandhills because it likes that sandy soil as well, and that's a turkey oak. And the turkey oaks are vulnerable to fire. So in a healthy sandhill or longleaf pine forest, you won't see turkey oaks because they'll be burned out by the fire. But if there's not enough fire, the turkey oaks start to encroach upon the forest. Not that they're bad, but it's just an indicator. And so there's around the periphery of some of these forests in this preserve, you'll see a bunch of these turkey oaks. And they call them turkey oaks because it supposedly looks like a turkey foot, which was probably a lot more familiar to the settlers than to us, but that's approximating a look of a turkey foot. And here are some of the animals of this habitat. Gopher tortoise is a keystone species. Other species depend on that gopher tortoise because it digs burrows, and other species live in those burrows. And it just loves the sandy soil in these sandhills. And the day we were out there, we saw the southeastern five-lined skink. So I took a picture of that. It was just crawling up the side of a pine tree. And then we have many others: bobcat, deer, bear, opossum, eastern indigo snake, some rattlesnakes. So it's just teeming with species, some of which you can see, some of which are kind of hidden. You got to look close. So the birds are very supported in this environment as well. All of these birds I've seen out there, but I can't take a picture. I don't have any kind of a good long lens to take a good picture for you. So these are pictures that I didn't take, but everything else in this presentation were pictures I took wandering around in this beautiful Julington Durbin Preserve. So then there's the floodplain forest. So this is a little lower elevation. So I'm going to go pretty quickly because we're running out of time. So as you get closer to the water, your forest becomes more hardwoods, less pine, and you can see how thick it is. This is a good example. So this side to the left is that floodplain forest, and to the right, it's our sandhill. See how spaced it is and how thick it is over there. So I'm going to quickly kind of just walk through these pictures and show you some of the species. There's sweet gum, looks like a hand, 5 leaves, 5-part leaf. Then there's the cypress tree, which grows in swamp. It likes wet feet. So that's down by the river. The sable palm I mentioned before, the sable palmetto, cabbage palm, our state palm tree. That's probably all familiar to you. And here's that spiky, pointed stalk that I mentioned that will tell you the difference between a cabbage palm and a saw palmetto. Then you get down to the riverside on that red trail. And here's the Durbin Creek. And here's that boat ramp I was talking about that belongs to Celestina Development. And then there's the river itself. So here's where we went out on the kayak in this boardwalk that I mentioned that was newly built. And there's a nice boat launch at the end, which is very easy to get in your kayak in that boat launch and not be tippy. And here's the creek. It's just a gorgeous kind of primordial feel through here. You would not know that there's, 1,400 homes to the left of here and the big development to the north of here. And there along this creek, there's these huge, old, ancient legacy cypress. They're huge, just beautiful. Here's another shot of one. The pickerel weed down in the and the shallows, and the cypress knees, which are these cypress roots that kind of come up above the ground. And that's about all I had. So we got